My name is Terrence Bark, and I'm the Executive Director of the Graphene Council. We're hosting today's panel discussion on graphene commercialization and adoption. Today's format's going to be a little bit different in that we're not doing any slide presentations. It's not death by PowerPoint. This is going to be a conversation about graphene commercialization and adoption in all aspects of it. And we've assembled a tremendous panel of experts that cover many different aspects of graphene, from research, standardization, graphene production. We have expert scientists and company founders and managers that are active in the field. So this is a really unique opportunity to bring all this brainpower together to discuss this. We're going to start out with a brief explanation of what the Graphene Council is. If you're not familiar with us, I'll be very short about that, and then we'll have each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into the questions. The Graphene Council was founded in 2013 as a neutral industry trade body and professional society on a global basis to represent the industry and to help accelerate the commercial adoption of graphene. Today, we connect more than 30,000 material scientists, 2/3 of which are in the commercial sphere, and 1/3 are university or academic based. And amongst other things, we work on international standards for graphene, facilitating commercial conversations with representation of leading graphene producing companies, intermediaries, and end users. And with that in mind, let's get right into our discussions and with our panel. And I would ask Turid, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself. I'll ask each of you to just do a brief introduction so we know who's on the panel.
Sure. Hi, my name is Turid Schwann, and I'm a material scientist. I'm with several years of experience in nanocarbons, carbon nanotubes, graphene, etc. And I'm now with the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany, and I'm leading the standardization task for the graphene flagship.
Excellent. And you've made fantastic contributions to our graphene classification framework, which was published recently and which is now being turned into an ISO standard. So Turid, I want to thank you personally for that, because you've been a tremendous help, along with the 100 volunteers that worked on that. Natasha, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thanks, Terrence. My name is Dr. Natasha Conway. I'm the research manager at Bio-Graph. My background is in semiconductor device physics and electronics. I spent most of my industrial career prior to graphene working on organic materials and electronics. I've been working at Bio-Graph for 2 years now, where I'm the research manager, working on the development of both delivering high quality graphene material and also demonstrating that in proof of concept devices for our target applications.
Yeah, very exciting things with Paragraph. You guys, I think it was recently a 60 million raise you guys had?
That's right, yeah. We just had a Series B raise of $60 million. We're really happy about that, and really does enable us to expand what we're doing, both in terms of our commercial sales and in terms of our R&D capability and production and tools.
Fantastic.
And we're hiring as well.
Well, I think what's interesting also to point out, you're very focused on the sensing technologies and on using the type of monolayer graphene as opposed to some of the bulk graphene, which are other applications. So
yeah, sensing, but also kind of more wider electronic applications. But you're absolutely right. We're really mainly focused on monolayer graphene and kind of high quality graphene applications, where our proprietary growth technology really enables us to have something that's scalable and compatible with current semiconductor processes.
Perfect. For some of our audience that maybe are not that familiar with graphene, as most of us are, graphene, from my perspective, especially for this conversation, for commercialization, should be considered a family of materials. There are many different types and forms that are commercially available. So Lynn Chikosha, if you could introduce yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So thank you very much for this opportunity to join other leaders in graphene. So my name is Lynn Chikosha, and I'm Research and Development Manager at Applied Graphene Materials. I've been with AGM since 2015. My background is in chemistry, and straight out of uni, I joined a global coatings manufacturer, where I worked on paints and coatings for use in anti-foulings, low VOC anti-corrosives, and also developing sort of amine curing agents. in 2015, as I mentioned, I joined Applied Graphene Materials as Product Development Manager. And between that time and now, I've been involved in the development of AGM's dispersion technology, as well as our applications, so demonstrating what graphene can do in real-world applications, and just making sure that we engage with our customers in a meaningful way.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know AGM is really kind of taking the lead in the coatings technology.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it's an area that we've focused on. There's a lot of potential application areas for graphene, and I think our approach has been to pick a few areas that we focus on and get that real-world meaningful data. So we've focused on coatings as one of the areas, and we've got some really good data where we've demonstrated what graphene can do and enhancements that it brings.
Fantastic. That kind of leads to a point, is that graphene can do so many things that we've seen graphene companies over the past decade. Some of them struggle because they chase too many markets, and don't really focus in. And I think it's smart to focus in on a couple of application areas. And Rafaela, can we ask you to introduce yourself and Bio-Graphene Solutions?
Hi, my name is Rafaela. I am the head of research and development of Bio-Graphene Solutions in Canada. It's a company that it's producing graphene here from organic source. And my background, it's chemistry. I'm a PhD in chemistry with training in Brazil, and I came to Canada to do my postdoc here. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to be part of this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafaela. And I always like to point out some things that get raised with this. It's in the graphene classification framework, we've identified no fewer than 14 different ways of making graphene and a variety of feedstocks. So I think it's interesting to note that, you know, there's a bio feedstock for graphene materials. And Angie?
Hi, my name is Angie Heitwalker, and I work at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US. I'm a spectroscopist by training. I do a lot of basic research and metrology studies on graphene and other 2D materials. I'm also very active in the standards development, the documentary standards development with many of the ladies here in ISO TC229.
And you neglected to say you're an expert on ramen. I would like to give a big shout out to Angie, because over the past, since the founding of the Graphene Council, I've learned as much as anybody from Angie about graphene, and she's been always kind enough to take my very rudimentary questions and give me thoughtful answers. So thank you for that, Angie. For Lin Shay, I would love you to introduce yourself in representing Graphene One and Kyrene material.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Linsha Delidi. I'm the owner of Graphene One LLC. So we are producer of a graphene material as well as a graphene fibers yarn. My background is totally different. I'm, in the business administration and, commercial. Thank you for having me, really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you, the Graphene One Council, Terrence, put this together. Today is a Women's Day. I actually never really thought about celebrating Women's Day. And definitely this will be the day like everyone will remember. And thank you for that.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I think it's good we do acknowledge it, but I want to point out you're all here because you're experts in graphene first, and have real competencies here. And for Graphene One, I already mentioned before, the shirt I'm wearing is made with your fibers for the Graphene X product, but made with Kyrene fibers. And it is legitimately the most comfortable shirt I have ever worn. People were asking why graphene in the fabric, and it's antibacterial, anti-odor, which I can tell you is appreciated in my household. So right.
Yeah, if I can add, our company actually started to on the research and development on the graphene material since 2009, and took us about 7 years to scale up the production of the graphene. And for me, my focus has been always on the commercial application, push for the end product. And I'm very passionate about the graphene, even though we have a different background, but at the end of the day, and I think this panel is very fascinating, to have this opportunity to discuss the commercialization and various topics.
Excellent. I think it's quite obvious graphene has taken a while to mature, but it's actually moving quite rapidly. And now is a very exciting time because we see a lot of real world actual commercial applications. And that's going to just accelerate over this next year. And the Graphene Council, obviously, we will do everything we can to make it accelerate. So Amaya, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Well, good morning for some, obviously. This is getting all the time frame in the world. So my name is Amaya Zurutuza. I am the scientific director of Graphenea. And in Graphenea, we produce some of those graphene materials. From one side, we produce graphene, high quality graphene for electronic type of applications. And on the other hand, we produce also graphene oxide-based materials as additives to improve mechanical properties and so on. As training, I'm a polymer scientist, and I was working in the pharmaceutical field in drug delivery. And then I joined Graphenea in 2010, the day exactly that Graphenea was born, I would say. And I've been there ever since. So we are trying to also to promote graphene into commercial applications and try to learn as much as we can, how to integrate it. I mean, at the end, you have to do a lot of work, as everybody here knows. And yeah, that's it.
Well, we're really pleased to have you. And I think Graphenia is a really interesting case study in the industry because you're producing, as you say, both graphene oxide and the CVD graphene. And I thought the other innovation that Graphenia has brought to the table, which is very clever and very useful, is your foundry service, where if somebody has a transistor or a chip design, instead of buying a wafer and then etching their own design, they can give you the design, and then you actually can make small run chips and make it very affordable, which, I think that's a really, really clever innovation and smart of the company. So congrats on all the progress, because Graphenia has also been a real champion, I think, for the industry overall over this past decade. So thank you.
Thank you for your kind words.
Haley from Mito, and welcome, Haley.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Haley Marie Keith, CEO and founder of Mito Material Solutions. At Mito, we actually have created a chemical functionalization process that allows us to functionalize graphene materials to create hybrid additives. And we're utilizing these additives and commercializing them into industries that reflect case, composites, adhesives, elastomers, foams, kind of you name it. We see ourselves as the bridge between the graphene producers that you guys have done so well producing and standardizing this amazing material. And we are utilizing and bringing that into our house, functionalizing it, and then helping the marketplace understand how best to utilize it and put it into their process. So that's what we're doing at Mito. We are a company that have been working in graphene for about 5 years, just raised a seed 2 round with a corporate investor as a lead in Jevity. We're very excited, and we're also hiring and setting up new operations and product development labs in Indiana.
That's really exciting for a couple of reasons. One, it's good to see that there is still robust investment in being made into this field. So companies, graphene companies, I wouldn't say it's easy to raise money, but it's also the money is still there. People are excited about it. And I think it's because we can demonstrate real world applications. And if I may say, Haley, Ingevity, the company that led the finance into you, is also a Graphene Council member. And we made this introduction actually between the companies, working on behalf of both of them. Well, we're glad we could make the match and facilitate that. That's kind of what the Graphene Council is about, is making connections, education, and facilitating this. I'm going to start with a question about standards. So recently, as I mentioned, the Graphene Council, with a group of 100 volunteers, created what's called the Graphene Classification Framework. And it's intended to help both producers, end users, and regulators better understand the different types of graphene And I know several of you have been involved, and even with Mito Materials, one of the team, Kayo there, is spearheading the work within ISO to turn it into a ISO standard. I'd like to hear from Turid, and then Angie, and then Haley, and then anybody else who would like to contribute. You know, why is it important for us to actually have standards? I mean, the industry basically has plowed ahead and continues to plow ahead without a whole bunch of standards in place. So the question might be, do we even need them? But what role do they play? And I know, Turid, also, because you have the Graphene flagship logo up there, we should talk about that. The Graphene flagship is a €1 billion initiative that I believe is in approximately year 8 of the 10-year mandate, and has had its own initiatives around graphene standards. So Turid, what's your perspective on standards? Why do we need them? You know, what role does the classification framework play, or anything else you want to talk about?
Yes, thank you. So actually we're in year 9, so we're pretty much close to the end next year. And that question I was actually asked some time ago: why do we need standards? Why do we need to put anything up on the webpage, for example? Because the statement that was thrown out to me was, well, if you have a contact, all that is proprietary anyway. So you have a conversation one-on-one. And I said, well, it's about the matchmaking, where you are looking through the internet, where you're looking for suppliers, and then you want to compare the information that you get. And if some of them use one method and the others use another method, and then you have obviously people doing it in the way that they think is best, that might differ from company to company. Also, they might just find a way that leaves their product in the best light for whatever reason. So you want to have something that's really comparable. And the other aspect is, which comes from industry, and I'm sure somebody will comment on that later, is that a lot of the standards that we have out there are too time-consuming, too complicated, the instrument's too expensive. And in fact, sorry, I have to switch the light on. Over here it's dark. I have to say, actually, I would love to have some more contribution from industry, because what we standardize so far, and we're doing quite well for measurement standards. I think Angie would agree with me on that one. I think we're doing quite well on that front. We are also just adjusting all the OECD guidelines, etc., for each. So the registration and evaluation of chemicals, which you need in Europe. But the criticism is that it's too complicated. However, we can only standardize what we understand. So if industry would come to research and say, we need statistical proof for, I don't know, measuring something by an indirect method, and then only use a direct method every 3 months, that would really help. That would push standards forward. So far, I think we're doing pretty well with the stuff that we understand. But to speed things up, we actually need interaction with industry. So this panel hopefully helps.
A great point. We do try to focus on what is commercially relevant rather than to be exhaustive. And I think what you've also alluded to there is kind of the holy grail, is a in-production quality control approach to measurement. And I know that there are certain institutes, including MJ Grafeno in Brazil, have a really interesting test method. And I know some of the other test houses are looking at like using maybe XRD method for bulk measurement, something that can be used for quality control. Angie, I wanted to get your perspective, because of course you represent NIST, and you are, you have deep expertise into the nuances of measurement. And, sometimes it's amazing how much we know, and yet how much we have yet to know. So what's your perspective on the standard side, the role of standards? And I know you don't represent like EPA and regulatory agencies, but we've also found that a lot of the scientists in EPA, graphene's new to them too, right? And so they need to learn about the different types and forms of material.
Right. And one of the ways that regulators often, the first thing they look for are documentary standards. Are there already documents available where they could reference them? And that's why it's important work. And I do agree it's arduous and perhaps sometimes overzealous in the sense that we first want to make sure that we do it correctly, to make sure the science is good. And then then we get more easily available or more rapid tests. But we always like to start with the technically correct first, and that sometimes turns, people off or, isn't as welcoming as it should be. But I do want to second exactly what you've already said, that having industry at the table is the key piece. So certainly at NIST, what we care about is US competitiveness. And if we want to trade these material systems throughout the world, we need to have some way to quantify the quality or any details about the sample. And honestly, that starts way back at what we're calling it. And as you know, this was even some issues back in carbon nanotubes, being able to have confidence in what we're calling things. And that's why the framework is so important. It really leverages that terminology work that's been going on and moving forward. Ultimately, we want to be able to sell products and make something great. All these applications like the concrete additives and things of that nature that could really impact climate, like immediately. We want those to get out there. We want those to be used. And people need to know what they're buying. And we have to have some references of, what are you selling? What are we buying? And that way, we don't want people to get discouraged. If you go to a company and you buy a product and you use it in your system and it works, and the next batch doesn't, it's a huge waste of money and time and facilities. And so those are the things we're just trying to avoid by collaboratively developing standards going forward.
You touched on a point I might want to revisit, and that's national strategies, because of course you have the Graphene Flagship, which was a European initiative and which has been very successful in popularizing graphene and also driving money towards R&D efforts. The UK obviously is in a very strong leadership position with the National Graphene Institute, the Graphene Engineering and Innovation Center, all at the University of Manchester. And the US, at least my assessment is we don't really have a national strategy in the US. And I do want to emphasize the Graphene Council is a global entity. We're incorporated in the US, in the UK, in Switzerland, and have an office in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So we don't really identify with any one geography, and we're interested in the industry as a whole, but national strategies are important. Haley, I wanted to just round off on the standardization, because your company does formulations. So you have a lot of iterations of graphene, a lot of different forms. And so the question of standards, impacts you a little bit differently. And I also want to, again, acknowledge that your group has volunteered to kind of spearhead this in the ISO group to get it through as an official ISO standard, which is not easy. Maybe you could talk about, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but the standards process does not enjoy a lot of commercial interaction. And I think there's reasons for that. And I don't know if you want to speak to that. I certainly would be happy to, but let's talk about how do we get industry more involved in this standard setting?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest barriers to entry, right, is just the time commitment and the time that it takes to go through it. And I think that to large corporations, though they seem to have a lot of time and all the time in the world, really, they don't want to take that time to dedicate to moving these standardizations forward. And for Mito, it became such a clear goal, right? Like I remember calling Angie just around this time last year and talking with her and explaining the problems we were having. We were incorporating and buying different types of graphene. There was not batch to batch consistency. How could we as a company sell a material that we're functionalizing and calling it the same thing and getting it out to our customers with scale without that consistency and that framework and that standardization? And that's so important for us at Mito to be able to deliver our customers the quality that they deserve, because what we do see in the industry is a lot of not necessarily bad actors. I think it's a lot of just misinformation, misunderstanding. So we run into clients and customers all the time in various industries that have either heard of graphene or they've tried graphene, and they were basically sent a vial of black powder that eventually turned to like a rock, and it didn't disperse, or it didn't work, or it kind of did. And it's a lot of unknowns, a lot of empty promises. It just sent something and there it is, it sat on the shelf. We're taking a much more active approach, not only in our customer relationships, but in our technology development and formulations. And then I think as a natural extension of that process became the standardization work that Caillou is leading. And I mean, I think for us that, we invest in our people as much as we're investing in graphene as an industry. And for our engineers and our international business folks to be able to understand the terminology and work with NIST and all these amazing scientists, like the fact that all of these women are sitting up here, polymer scientists, background in chemistry, material scientists, we're all taking the time because it's necessary. And I think it's an honor that Caillou has been able to champion the graphene framework, but mostly the Graphene Council's work in connecting industry and science to be able to move the whole industry forward, recognizing the importance of standards. I mean, it just kind of becomes a no-brainer. And I think this panel of women, I definitely understand that. You just got to do it. You got to get the work done.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I want to segue to what would be quite a different topic now. Mido, you get to see a lot of different material in graphene, the forms of graphene. And we have to always remember this. When we talk about graphene in the commercial sense, we're talking about, potentially hundreds of different permutations of graphene material. It's highly dependent on the graphene production method. So I'd like to kind of go to Amaya and Rafael and Lynn Kitrosa. About, you have different production methods that result in different forms of graphene, which then perform differently. So starting with Rafaela, you guys have a bio feedstock, and to the extent you can share without giving trade secrets or proprietary information to talk about your production methodology, just kind of talk about, the type of material you produce and maybe some of the challenges, and talk about the supply chain, feedstock, production methods, how to get it to a competitive price point, these kind of things.
Yeah, in our case, in the Bio-Graphene solutions case, we had this decision that we would just go from organic source, and we started with biochar, and now we are switching gears from a different organic approach. The advantage we found is that we have, for example, in Canada, biochar it's something that it's easy to obtain, even in other countries like my country as well. And the problem with the standardization, it's because depending on the nature of the biochar that you are getting, you will have different components, and we choose before in the industry to not use what we call harsh chemistry. We are trying to stay as a clean tech as possible. That means we are avoiding to use all these other treatments, and I am a chemist, I worked with that before, so all these acid waste and alkaline waste, we avoid that. And so far it's been successful, but again, for us, the part of a standardization, it's been, I cannot say a struggle in the sense that we are quite successful in the way we are doing right now, and it's leading for IP. It's just that we, in terms of feedstock, we need to search in different countries, depending where you want to establish yourself. There is this question: if you, for example, if you want to sell in South America, are you going to ship all the way from Canada to South America, or you will just have production there? And if that is true, your feedstock will be the same. Are you going to have variables because you are dealing with organic? And that is the part that requires a lot of analysis from the, let's say, from our raw material, and we need fine tuning as well for our production line to make sure that we always do the same material, or we reduce the variations batch to batch. And one thing that I just want to mention is that speaking with our customers, it's a key, because again, like was said, if you just give a black powder and wish them good luck, will be very difficult that they will call you again. So that's the point.
Yeah.
We are always focusing on Bio-Graphene solutions.
Thank you, Rafael. You raise a couple of interesting points there. One, and again, our audience is comprised of all sorts of stakeholders. The graphene business is interesting because the capital equipment required for some of the production facilities is not that expensive. It's not that extensive. You know, a couple $1 million and you have a graphene production plant, and you can put them close to where the end user is. But then the feedstock has an impact on what your outcome is. And the other aspect from what I took away from what you just shared, Rafael, was that, and this is, we know this is true, that graphene for any application really needs to be tuned and modified for the end use application specifically to be effective. And then the repeatability becomes a challenge. But we've seen companies make a lot of progress. And the other aspect we didn't touch on yet is scale. Because it's also to produce at volume. The Graphene Council has forecast that the demand for graphene, if it penetrates, for example, 0.1% of the concrete market in the next 3 to 6 years, that alone is 110,000 metric tons of graphene at the rate of 33 grams per metric ton. That's crazy, right? So we're looking at between 300 and 700,000 metric tons of demand for this material over the next approximately 5-6 years. And so that's going to require all producers to work together on scaling. I have another question and coming up on that, but Lynn, I'd like Lynn Chicosa talk about, because you guys do a lot of work on coatings. And maybe you could talk about, you know, again, your production method and the type of material you use. And you have a really interesting case study I'll shout out about in a second, but talk to us about your production process and what your view is on scaling, for example.
Okay, so our production method is primarily a bottom-up synthesis method. So this really allows us to control the variability from batch to batch. Because we've got control of the process, and we can fine-tune the process in terms of the parameters that we're trying to optimize in the end user system. So for instance, as you mentioned, we're developing products for the coatings market. So we know that morphology is important. We know that the lateral dimensions of the platelets are important. So we make sure when we're doing our quality control that we've made platelets that deliver what we're working towards. One of the things that I think it was Haley touched on was, you know, stability of the graphene powder. And a lot of times you'll approach a customer and they'll tell you about, well, we've tried graphene, it doesn't work because they got clumpy material that they tried to incorporate and it didn't work. So one of the things that we focus on is developing intermediate dispersions. So we do a lot of pre-dispersing of the graphene into customer matrices. So we put it into resin, put it into solvent. So we've got the equipment to do it safely. And we've also got the know-how to understand if we're developing a dispersion for anti-corrosive performance in a coating system, this is where we need to have our particle size. These are the solvents that we need to disperse into. We can also do bespoke, but we can optimize that for the customer so it's easy to transport the graphene dispersions, and end users don't have to change the equipment that they have because they're used to handling the resins and solvents. We've already encapsulated the graphene, so it's safer for them to use and to incorporate. But also a key thing is the stability of the dispersions. So if you're just introducing a powder and you don't have the specialist equipment or the knowledge, then you're probably just going to end up with lots of black clumps in your system, and you go, well, it's all great about the hype, but it's not doing anything. But really, it's just about understanding how to use the material. So most of our activity around scale up is really around developing those intermediate dispersions that are easy for customers to use, that are safe for customers to use, and just make sure that the benefits of graphene are translated into the customer systems.
Excellent. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe this is violating an NDA. You guys are cracking ethylene. Is that right?
Yeah.
Ethylene is your feedstock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've got a couple of processes that we use for our synthetic route. One of them uses ethanol, the other one uses a solid substrate, and both of them allow us to have a little bit of. So you'll know you can vary the number of layers, degree of oxidation, the morphology. So having those two synthetic routes allows us to vary some of those properties. So we've got two synthetic graphenes that we've got in-house. We've also collaborated with other graphene manufacturers. So we've got as well some exfoliated, well, it's from exfoliated graphite, but we've got graphenes that have been made from a top-down synthesis route, which are also part of our range as well. So
if you'll allow me, I'm going to unpack. You actually touch on a whole bunch of things that are really, really interesting. No, it's perfect. This is why we want to have this conversation. And this is the first time, by the way, I think that this group has ever actually come together, right? Like not everybody knows each other. So I think this is fascinating to kind of see that we have some common experiences. I think what's really interesting about what you've mentioned, for example, that you make a compound, that you make a master batch out of your material, has a couple of interesting things, and there are other companies that take this approach because it eliminates the customer handling the dry, raw material. It eliminates the customer from basically screwing it up by not handling the material properly, not dosing properly, not having the right dispersion. Gives you better control over quality control. And one of the aspects I'd like to have us touch on is the concept of value add in the production process, because just making and selling graphene as a raw material is of course a business, but then you can have these master batches, or if you look at Paragraph as a company, for example, where you make complete devices and what you're selling is a device, or Kyrene where you're selling a fiber that goes into a textile, you're further up the value chain. I think that's an interesting discussion for graphene companies is where do you all fit, in the value chain? And I think that's a good segue to Amaya and Graphenia, because Graphenia, you have your graphene oxide business, but you have also then this CVD and this foundry business, which I'm fascinated by and I think is a brilliant move by you guys. And you're one of the more successful companies. You're also one that's been at this for the longest time. And so you've been able to go through these different business iterations. Talk to us about, basically you're running two different businesses with two different materials that have two different, application targets. Just talk to us a little bit about that, your production methodologies, and where do you see this going? What's the future look like?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. Maybe before that, I just wanted to say that this graphene family materials, I would classify them into two groups of how they are produced. And already Lynn mentioned the top-down and the bottom-up. So top-down, you typically start from graphite or another organic source or inorganic source, and then you exfoliate to get the nanomaterial, the graphene flakes. And on the bottom up, let's say by the rearrangement of carbon atoms, you can get a monolayer graphene, what we call with the method CVD, chemical vapor deposition, and you produce the monolayer graphene films. And of course, these two materials are targeting totally different applications. And this is the reason why we split Graphenia into two business units, let's say. So on one side, we have Graphenia Advanced Materials, and on the other one, we have Graphenia Semiconductor. In a way, it was to be ready for industry, for capturing further investors, customers that would be interested only on one of the lines, because at the end, they are two very distinct materials. And that's one of the reasons we sort of split the business units. So even we have the Graphenia group, we have two business units in a way to tackle for these different application scenarios. And now to talk about the CVD graphene, which is the one we have done the foundry. As you very well said, at the beginning, we have changed our business model along these years, because at the beginning, we were only selling graphene, and we realized that to add value to the product, on one way you do further processing, so you commercialize devices, but on the other hand, we were helping customers to focus on the applications rather than fabricating devices, because at the end you have many steps to fabricate these devices, and they were in a way wasting time on that sense. So we are helping to push graphene closer to the market by going deeper in the value chain. So we realized this quite early on. I mean, our graphene foundry, graphene GFET and foundry business, we launched it already. The idea came already a long time ago, I think in 2013 or something, when we started fabricating our own devices, but it took time to develop. And I wanted to touch also on the investment aspect. You said to make a plan to produce graphene. I mean, it's very different. These two business lines require very different investment scenarios and amounts. And I mean, Paragraph was very successful in raising a lot of money. And I think at the end, the semiconductor industry, graphene for electronics, does need a lot of investment. And another challenge I wanted to point out and maybe open discussion is about the regulation. From the safety aspect, environmental, and each application is going to have a regulation for a new material. This is a really huge challenge. Yeah. And I stop there.
Well, I appreciate that last comment. Health and safety is a very complicated topic, and I think let's come back and address that in a second. And I know that we have questions from the audience as well that we want to come to. I want to ask Lin Shay about your model, because you're producing your graphene, but then it goes into your fibers, which then goes into other products. And so there's an example of, going up that value chain. Have you considered, selling the graphene material at any point? And I guess, what are some other ways of doing value add, or are you looking at other applications for your material?
Oh, for sure. We started I mentioned we started in 2009. Actually, it's a coincidence because we have a sister company, which is a solar panel producer. We manufacture solar panels. So in 2009, we started to speak with some of the university who is active in the research of the graphene material. So we're talking about what if graphene can increase the efficiency of solar panel. This is how we started. And because we have another business in the textile, I will go a little bit later to introduce. So in the beginning, yes, to answer your question, Terence, we wanted to produce just the material. So maybe it took that 2014, we were able to produce just the material. But then we realized we just not really like a market for us. Like it's hard to really scale up. And then we say we actually have this textile background, because for us the most important is one of the most important is the market needs. It has to be sustainable. We can produce tons of graphene, and by the end of the day, if there's no end product, it's not going to sustain for a long run. So what can we do to bring this material to everyone's day-to-day life? And we thought about the textile, and actually, of course, with a lot of help from the researcher, like scientists, and so we kind of tried in the textile, and we found that those are amazing properties like bacteriostatic, like you said, thermal regulation, and odor control. And the whole textile can benefit, from those properties enormously. So again, it took us a really long time to really break through with some companies like those 8 brands. They just had another webinar, the VF Group Contour brands with the Li Jings and also Graphene X. Averagely would say like it takes 2-3 years to work with one company to really develop end products. And in the same time, actually, we have another company who is in the PPE business. And our company is B2B, is not even B2C. We produce safety gloves. What I'm trying to say, it sounds very difficult to really introduce end products as far as, according to our experience, in the textile. It takes really long time to educate the users what benefits the graphene can bring to the textile, to the fiber. But at the end of the day, it just takes consistent work. We'll have to just work and get through and test, find those property and just, educate the end users, because our company for the PPE is B2B. It's very difficult for us, of course, to introduce a new material. But of course, through the years of working and, now if we talk about the PPE business, especially for the safety gloves, actually graphene is really known in our industry. It's very niche industry, but it's quite exciting to see, if you talk about people in the safety businesses, they know what graphene is. That for us is very rewarding, all the work sometimes also takes a lot of patience to really get through. And now the graphene gloves is in the big airlines, like a big automotive industry. They really understand what graphene can do, at least in the safety gloves. And of course, mentioned before with Graphene X and VF Group Contour, and there's more and more products like the jeans and apparel and socks. Those are like we spend really long time to break through and introduce the end products. Again, we feel, again, like I said, I'm more on the commercial side. I'm really fascinated by all the panelists in your background. It's like from the science and, it's really amazing. We can bring all this together. We know it to produce graphene and to really apply those properties in different products. It's a long process. It's not very easy, but I think it just takes a lot of effort and takes patience. Again, the end product, the market needs is still will kind of pull us together, and it has to be sustainable.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much for that. It just reminds me that, as an industry, we're not actually competing with one another. And we do have companies that are all kind of in the same area, but we're really competing against legacy materials and lack of education and awareness on the customer base. And with that, Natasha, I'd like to ask you, because Paragraph has been, I think, really successful in a relatively short period of time. You had your Hall effect sensors, and you had this really high-profile trial with the CERN Center in, depending on what side of the border you're on, it's either in France or Switzerland. You've obviously attracted a lot of interest from the investment community, which is kudos to you guys. You've built a really, are you over 100 people now? How many are you?
No, we're 70 people.
70. Next week, you'll be 100. So just talk a little bit about, and this is a question for everybody, what are really the main obstacles to customer adoption? Is it, just lack of awareness? Is it risk aversion? What are the biggest obstacles? Because at this point, we know graphene works, right? This isn't a question anymore. We know it works and we know it has real application. So why is it not being, adopted faster, do you think?
Yeah. I think one of the things we recognized when we started at Paragraph was that we had a proprietary technology for growing our graphene at electronic grade on scale in the semiconductor process using our MOCVD process. But in order to demonstrate what that really means to the potential customers, we had to demonstrate the devices. So we made a decision very early on that, as you mentioned before, to really kind of show the value of having electronic grade graphene. We wanted to develop electronic grade devices where the unique properties of graphene were really setting it apart from the incumbent technologies on the market. So I can give the example of our Hall effect sensor, as you mentioned. So we developed the Hall effect sensor that can have a kind of a resolution and sensitivity that's an order of magnitude better than what you can get with silicon Hall effect sensors that are on the market. And that's at room temperature. And then if you take that down to the cryogenic temperatures, like some of the work we're doing with CERN and the high fields, then there's actually no sensor on the market at the moment that can operate at those kind of low, a few Kelvin temperatures, which basically kind of demonstrates the way to get noticed in the market is to be doing something game-changing, do something that you can't do with an incumbent technology. If you're only showing a small improvement on the incumbent, then the risk is always going to be going to outweigh the benefit to the potential customer, they're going to stick with the status quo. So you really do need to work on making sure that your value is clear to the customer. And actually that part of that is also just talking to the customers, learning what they need. We've got a wide range of applications, not just in the Hall effect sensor we're working on. We're also working on biosensing technologies and also working on kind of solid state applications where we're talking to semiconductor manufacturers and understanding from them what are the problems to be solved, what are they looking at on their roadmap, where do they not know how they're going to solve it, and where can graphene help is a key part of really getting it adopted by the market.
You raised some really good points. I think you guys are doing a great job and being quite successful with that. But we have seen, just because you can use graphene doesn't mean you should use graphene, kind of thing, if it's more technology push, right? So if your application is just marginally better than an incumbent, we've seen that companies don't want to take the risk on an unproven material which doesn't have a robust supply chain. So you need like a 30-40% delta in improved performance to get somebody to take the risk to try, and then you'll see the other companies follow, right? We'll see that come. Turid, I'd like to ask you this question, from your perspective, because you're quite active, flagship and with your perspective in Germany, what are the biggest obstacles from your perspective? Why isn't graphene taking hold, especially because, a lot of money has been invested by the flagship to formalize, and I'm not asking you to give an official position from the flagship, but you have that perspective. No. Right, is there's a lot of investment. There's a higher level of awareness in Europe about what graphene is, but still the adoption is not that rapid. Why do you think that is?
So when you ask me, you will always get a kind of standardization answer, obviously. But I spoke to a large chemistry company in Germany the other day, and we were discussing all kinds of things, carbon nanotubes, graphene, etc. And that guy I talked to, he said, well, the first question actually is, does it have a REACH registration? And for us, certainly in science, we all were like, REACH. It's more like, it's something you need to do, but nobody is really enthusiastic about doing it. And then when you come to REACH, there's one registration for graphene. And as you said, Terence, and Amaya as well, graphene is very different materials, and at the moment, everything is graphene, up to 35 layers in REACH. So they then look at the standardization, and they try to apply standards which are only defined for 10 layers or monolayers, and it kind of goes into the whole, and the as I said before, the regulations for nanomaterials, or the regulations for health and safety, have not quite been adjusted for nanomaterials yet. So we're really in a loop. And luckily for graphene, we do have a REACH registration. It's maybe not perfect yet, but that's a big thing. So at that point, really, standardization is a key. Because in Europe, if you want to sell material, you have to have a REACH registration.
Oh, that makes sense. And for those who maybe are not aware, there's also what's called a REACH consortia in Europe, comprising, I think, it's 8 or more graphene companies that have actually come together to do one registration, which is different than typically in the United States. You go for a TSCA registration with the EPA. It's quite typically individual companies that go and make a very narrow registration. But I think this approach where a group of companies have come and to give a broader range of values for their registrations might be an approach that one would recommend for the US. Angie, I want to go to you and ask you, because you had this perspective, you mentioned, and a few have mentioned carbon nanotubes. And, a lot of people feel that graphene may have suffered because carbon nanotubes went through a period of high expectation, disappointment. And then there is a health and safety aspect of carbon nanotubes because of their morphology, the physical structure. Are there lessons to be learned from what CNTs went through? Should we even be comparing graphene with CNTs at all? What do you think?
Well, certainly they're both carbon, so I can see the comparison. But certainly one of the issues with carbon nanotubes is they aren't a single entity. Just like when we're talking about graphene, all of us, what we're talking about graphene, we're all thinking of something slightly different. And that is something that I could see being similar to what happens with the nanotubes. Ultimately, in my opinion, the scientific data did not show that nanotubes were as awful as some of the preliminary studies. Because what was interesting is they hadn't characterized the nanotubes prior to feeding them to the fish. So they didn't know that there were nanoparticles of cobalt and molybdenum, which we know are inherently bad. So it's really understanding the system before study. And that is where EHS work, and again, that work is also happening within ISO. It's a different working group, Working Group 3 on EHS. But I'd say what's wonderful in the graphene world is we have not seen adverse health effects almost at all in any of the studies. And I think that came a little bit about watching what happened with the tubes and again, doing really good characterization before study, making sure that what you were studying was actually what you meant to study and things of that nature. But having this reach issue, and again, definitions, 35 layers, 10 layers, we really all have to get on the same page with what we're talking about. And ultimately that will lead to more adoption and less fear or just concern, I think is perhaps the best way to say it.
You raised some really good points. Earlier last year, I think it was in April, Health Canada had issued a statement that halted the sale, distribution, and use of graphene-enhanced face masks. As a result, the Graphene Council actually had those face masks tested both at the NPL, the National Physical Laboratory in the UK, arguably one of the absolute most competent centers for testing graphene on the planet, and also in the US. And then going through that, we also did a study then of looking backward to see which health and safety toxicological reports had been published over the past years, and we categorized them. So there was quite an effort that the Graphene Council did to kind of do an assessment. And one of the things that we noticed with that is that people would say, okay, we used graphene in this toxicological test, but they didn't we didn't know if it was it sub 1 micron, was it multiple micron, was it 10 layer, what was the chemical composition, just exactly what you were saying, Angie, that then it becomes impossible to go backward and say this type of graphene causes this toxicological effect. And that's the next work we're going to try to do, is actually go back and see if we can categorize the graphene that was used in a tox study. So that's really quite complicated. I guess a question I would like to ask the panel, and if you want to use the raise hand or something, if you would like to respond to this, who should pay for tox studies? I mean, they're hugely expensive. And we've had a couple of examples where companies have had material approved for FDA use, right? For use in plastic bottles, for example. It can cost $1 million to have a study done. So it's one of those things everybody would benefit from. Nobody wants to pay for it themselves. Who should pay for this stuff? All right, I'll comment further until somebody steps up to answer a question. What we have seen, because there have been some TSCA registrations, is that the companies who pay for the studies and then do the application tend to then make the application so narrow, it will only apply to their material. Nobody else benefits from it. So I think this is obviously, the fact that this is a touchy subject and it's difficult to address tells us why we don't have more tox studies. So I see, Lynn, you have your hand up if you want to go first, and then Turid, we'll go to you. So Lynn?
Yeah. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's quite expensive getting these studies done. I think this is where it helps to collaborate rather than compete. So like you mentioned with the REACH consortia, where AGM was active, and we managed to get reach registration as a group. And also, it also helped with including lots of different materials because we had a few suppliers on the panel. So I think it is a heavy financial burden for one organization or one group. So it's collaborating with, companies that would normally think of as competitors, and just covering those costs. But also in some cases, if we're working closely with customers, and you've come up with a joint application that they would benefit from and you would benefit from, then you could potentially split the cost that way. So I think it's just thinking of it as collaboration rather than one organization having to foot the bill. Find partners to collaborate with so that you can split the bill a few ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. It also reminds me that in some cases, the graphene companies are relatively small companies, but their customers could be multi-billion-dollar entities. And so, the risk-benefit ratio favors the larger customer. Actually, they have a stake in it. So maybe some risk sharing with the customer makes a lot of sense. Ture, do you have your hand up? What would you like to comment on this topic?
Well, it's point of reach, as Lynn already said. So the reach registration works in the way that you have a consortium of companies basically paying for those studies. And then everybody else who wants to sell graphene in Europe has to license that from this consortium. So you get money back if somebody else comes in. And so the cost of those tox studies is really shared by the producers and users. And I think that's the fairest way to do it because they also make the money from it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? The more that participate, it benefits everybody. Thank you. And Lynn Shea, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I also agree it has to be a kind of a collective effort. And I don't know how we can call all the companies together, maybe through Graphene Council, because honestly, I think the Graphene Council is most active association for graphene. I know, Terence, you're passionate about graphene. It's true that as a company, we have encountered some, not issues, but challenge. We talk about the reach registration, but in the same time on the textile, because we know graphene actually kills bacteria in the mechanical movement because it's called a nano knife. It breaks the bacterial membrane. It's not through a chemical treatment. So it should be different from anything from biocidal or pesticide, but the truth is graphene itself, it's not clear and nobody can, you can find lots of white paper online, but this is not going to satisfy the registration. They say you still need an EPA registration, right? In Europe, it's going to be like biocidal registration. But it's truly like graphene is not a chemical treatment. It should be exempted from this kind of registration. We have consulted lots of lawyers. Either you have a choice to register as biocidal agent or material, which is not really the issue of graphene because it kills bacteria through mechanical movement. And they confirm it should be exempted. But who is going to do that work and who is going to prove that? I think, again, like everyone said, we are kind of a family, graphene family, because this world, this industry is very fascinating, very make everyone just excited because everyone read about graphene, what graphene can do. People just passionate about graphene. By the end of the day, it's a small industry. I think it's still kind of evolving and on the rising side, and we just have to support each other, kind of break through as a whole industry. There's really we see as well, it's the less competition, there's more collaboration than competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at this beginning stage of the industry, there's much more to be gained by working together. And, we want every company to succeed because the market potential is so large. It's going to take everybody. It's not a case of, somebody taking food off of somebody else's plate. We're not even close to that, right? There's so much more to grow. And we do need to work together to address these main obstacles to adoption. Rafaela, you had a hand up for a question about this topic.
The point I see, it's yes, we need to try to collaborate with other partners as, let's say, if you are a graphene company that it's working for concrete and asphalt, maybe you could try to have agreement with the other companies, but it always ends up in a part that are we having competition or not? But I think from the moment that you manage to develop a product that it's a no-brainer solution for your final customer that he can basically just implement in their production chain per se, he would be willing to share some of these costs if your business model it's strong enough for that. Ideally, many of these graphene applications, like was mentioned before, should be basically exempt from health and safety issues, in the sense that, for example, when you apply to concrete and asphalt, besides some environmental, let's say, issues you might have, I cannot say issues, but questions you might have. Beside that, what is the problem you would face, because the people who would be handling would not be working with powder. So the graphene itself, the field must be divided in the way that makes sense. Was like, you need to know what you are characterizing, and you need to know what will be sent for exactly this health and safety. Because if you say it's health and safety for example, for water treatment, this graphene application will be different from textile, from solar panels, and so on. So the industry must to divide in segments and see who will be exempt and who really needs to go for this type of regulation per se.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we should always remember, in many cases, in most cases, graphene is being used as an additive that's fully embedded in a host matrix and does not get liberated. You're using it in a very small amount. It's pure carbon, it's biocompatible, it's, it's all these things that would mitigate treating it as some kind of hazardous chemical or something. Amaya, you have your hand up on this topic. What's your perspective?
Yes, no, I wanted to say that probably for the graphene flakes, the ones to be used as additives, the regulation is one of the big obstacles, and that's it. Each application will require a specific regulation. You need to make sure the graphene doesn't leach out. Even if you think it doesn't, you need to demonstrate it. So that's why it's one of the obstacles. But in the case of the electronic grade graphene, the CVD graphene, in that case, regulation is not such a big hurdle, let's say. I mean, because with 1 gram of this material, you can fill a whole football pitch. So it's not a powder, let's say. It goes on a substrate. So from that perspective, is safer, and regulation doesn't pose such a big obstacle. But for the CVD graphene, maybe the biggest obstacle is that technological barrier is much larger. So integration of this material with other existing materials, this is where the obstacle is. And I just wanted to comment on a previous comment by you about why we don't have more products of graphene. Well, because at the end, there are many examples out there of advanced materials that have taken many years. So to build a market for a new advanced material can take many years. So patience is the key.
No, I think it's for those of us who, like all of us who are involved in this every day, sometimes we feel it's going very slow, but if you take a historical perspective, it's actually going quite fast. I've been trying to find an analogy somewhere in history, and I think the best one is aluminum, that took, from the 1840s, when it was first isolated, it was more expensive than gold, and it was this precious metal. And then the process became improved. But if you're careful to look at the timeline, it was decades in between, each incremental improvement. And then voila, now we use it to wrap our food, and then we throw it away. It becomes so cheap. So I think with graphene, we're still early days, but as the Graphene Council, we are squarely focused on how can we accelerate the adoption and get over all these obstacles as quick as we can, because we know it has a beneficial impact. One of the things that we haven't highlighted yet is, the whole world is looking at how do we get to net zero? How do we get to a more sustainable future? And it's crystal clear that legacy materials will not get us there. We need much, much better performance out of all of our materials. And graphene is so versatile across so many different application areas. It really is, I think, an important ingredient into getting us closer to that net zero goal. What I'd like to do with the time that we have, and I think, this conversation could go all day. I want to make one statement first. And, today is International Women's Day. But I wanted to have this panel not because you all happen to be women, but because you're really brilliant people active in the graphene sector, and you have a lot to contribute, which I think is crystal clear from the conversation we've had today. You're all leaders and you happen to be women. And so we want to celebrate that graphene is blessed with having so many really good, strong female leaders in this sector. So from my side as the Graphene Council, I just want to acknowledge that. And thank you all for participating in this panel. And what I'd like to do is give everybody a chance to kind of give a summary statement or a word of advice on two aspects. One, where do you see the future of graphene? What are the most exciting applications you might have? And secondly, for any women out there who are maybe thinking about what do they want to do with their career, because they can take their talents anywhere. They can go into finance, they can go into business, they can go into engineering, they can go into whatever sector they choose. Why should they go into something like advanced materials and like this material sector, assuming that's something you would recommend to them? Any words of advice you might have along those lines. So those would be the two things I'd ask. And so I'll just kind of go through the panel and ask for the response. And Lynn Shea, if you don't mind, I'll start with you just because the grid seems to have, I don't know about you guys, but it kind of jumped around and you're my top left now. So Lynn Shea, if you want to, what's your perspective or in words of advice?
Yeah, we think, of course, because we have switched the kind of a go down in the value chain in the textile, this is still our focus. And textile can be so diversified, it's coming from apparel to socks to bedding to shoes. It's a huge market. And, graphene is proven having those benefits that can bring to all those products. And of course, for us, it takes a lot of patience, and consistency, but we'll keep pushing. Another question you had about women in this graphene industry sector. What's my advice? Actually, I don't really see any gender in this industry because, we have in this panel, most of the panelists, you're scientists. Really it's really amazing to see women in the science. But I think each individual has their weakness and the strength. And it doesn't, some people they see visual better. Some people, they just see data. It's not about gender. I think, also this industry is so big, it's not just the graphene is not something remains in the lab, or in the production. The goal is not just to produce the graphene material. This material was discovered in 2004. We are in 2022. It's about 18 years. It takes quite long. I don't really know how many years it's going to take, but I think it's time to really push the end products and application and commercialization, and because it has to be sustainable, And for, as Terrence, you said, a lot of companies, they are small size companies. They are funded by investors. They're looking for the result number as well. Of course, you're not talking about number because we are all passionate about this graphene as a material. We know it has this amazing property. That's why it's called a wonder material. How do we move forward? I mean, in this industry, the supply chain, actually the chain is so long, from the lab, from the research and development to production. And then, as far as the textile, we have seen, you have fashion companies, you have many jobs around graphene. You can be in the marketing, you can be in the branding, you can be in the logistics, supply chain. And this, again, each individual has different strengths, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all women to find their position or find their passion in graphene.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rafaela, let's go to you for your comments and view.
So I agree as well that the industry, it's quite big, and like we commented before, that it happened that all of us in this panel are women, and we are happy with our careers. And I would like to say to anyone that it's thinking, young girls or early stage professionals, this is an environment that you will work hard, and it will pay off, of course. I don't see gender as well, because what I understand and what I see in my own path in science is that people helped me, or per se give me opportunity, because of what I was showing while I was a student, my capacities. They didn't see it was a girl or whatever it was. They just want to know, can you produce the results? Can you deliver the job? And it's the same thing for the company. I have great respect for my team, because they didn't hire me because I was a woman. It's just because they saw someone that was capable to deliver the results they were looking for. And I believe that in this field, we have such a way to grow. You can grow as a finance, you can grow as a manager, can be a scientist and keep having fun in your lab, or you can end up as a salesperson. So don't feel intimidated, because sometimes it's you feel the industry doesn't move as fast as you would like, or the other type of companies, because this is a cycle. For example, before the liposomes were in the market, let's say, were in the labs for such a long time, and suddenly we had a boom. So it will happen with several nanomaterials, and the graphene will not be different. And we will keep having issues to address. I just saw one question, people asking, oh, what about the concrete? At the end of life of the concrete, we will have this dust of a graphene. The amount is very small to be considered even a dust per se. But for example, people will have different job to analyze this with time as well. So the field is open for people with different skills, and I encourage everyone. When I was in Brazil, I met Professor Dressenhaus. She was an amazing person, and I cannot say enough how much it was good for me to meet someone like her, because I saw her in her late days, and she had the same passion for what she was working. And I just would like to encourage, if you want to work in this field, be passionate about what you are doing, and it will come the payoff. That is the advice I would say to anyone who want to come in this field, regardless of their gender.
Thank you, Rafael. We've seen no fewer than 45 major vertical markets for graphene. There's a home for everybody, that's for sure. And Natasha from Paragraph.
Yeah, sure. I mean, starting first on a question on the future of graphene, I think regardless of what the application is, reliable scalability, being able to produce to the quality you need for your application repeatably well, is going to have to be, there to have a successful product. And then for our kind of product areas, as I mentioned previously, it really is going to be making sure that you're doing something game-changing, probably across the board, really. You need to be showing that you can do something that's significantly better than what's out there. So in our example, it would be biosensing, faster and more accurate than anything out in the market, or solid state applications where we're working in bandwidths and frequencies, where the mobility of graphene means it's much higher bandwidth and frequency than you can get with existing materials. And in terms of to women wanting to work in advanced materials, I'd say, yeah, if you're passionate about it, definitely do it as a career. I've not regretted it. I love the multidisciplinary nature of it. It's not just one science. I'm consistently talking to chemists, to biologists, to physicists. We're all working together to get the most out of the material we're working on. And it's not, if you start off in the scientific side and you decide to work to a more commercial application, there's the opportunities there to kind of like look towards kind of sales or management or marketing. The opportunities are there, I think. And again, at Adecco, other people are really, I feel very valued both by my company and throughout my career, that I was recognized as a researcher or a successful person, not as a successful woman. And I think by, I would say, be passionate and, try not to focus on the fact that you're female, just focus on the fact that you can be good at what you do.
Oh, absolutely. You raised so many good points. I think for companies to really identify high value problems to solve, using graphene and its unique properties is important. And you're obviously passionate about your position there. So thank you for that. Really appreciate those words. Angie, let's go to you and get your perspective.
I was just looking around. I think I'm one of the older ones here. But yeah, I think going forward, one of the exciting future areas is not only in microelectronics, solid state, high end things, but also in thermal management. And I think that has many different application areas, but I'm going to say broadly thermal management. And then as far as being a woman, what's much more important than your gender is, are you doing what you love to do? Because if you're not, chances aren't good. So, if you love what you do, then it kind of all works out. Not that it's all smooth sailing, but, when you love what you're doing, it just makes everything easier, to handle. And of course, being with a great team, that makes all the difference too. When you're working with people that you enjoy and have a shared vision, I just can't say enough about that.
Those wise words. Amaya.
Okay, my turn now. So for the applications that I think they are most promising, I would mention biosensors, because graphene is all surface. It could detect even a single molecule, hopefully in the future. So early detection of diseases, of different cancers, improve quality of life. I mean, what else do you want from that perspective? Also, another two applications I wanted to mention, for example, photonics, so graphene in telecommunications, so in switches and modulators. It could provide much more efficient, energy efficient data centers, so we don't have to cool them down so much, and they are energetically quite ineffective. So it could enable much more efficient data transport, let's say, in the future. And the third application is optoelectronics. So for example, for night vision camera applications, for safer driving and so on, it could enable much cheaper night vision cameras, so we could apply them in our cars. And some words to women. Well, for me, the question would be, why graphene? Well, because graphene is a material that at least it surprises me every day. So I find something that is new, exciting every day. So, I mean, I couldn't ask for more. But also, of course, the team and the people you work with, of course, these are the two most important things in life.
And I suppose it doesn't hurt to be in San Sebastian.
No.
A beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And Lynn?
So I'll start with the question on the future of graphene. I think in the future, graphene is going to have a really big part to play in terms of sustainability and clean technology. I think given its properties, we're seeing a lot of patent activity in terms of energy storage and battery applications. And I think that's probably going to be a big area where graphene is going to have an impact. And when you consider as well the impact that graphene has in terms of longevity and improving durability of products, which is something we've seen in coatings where we've got an extension of life. Again, that improves the sustainability of those structures because you're not constantly having to repaint them or replace them. So I think sustainability is really a key area where we're going to see graphene having an impact. And with that in mind, at AGM, we've developed a series of sustainable dispersions because we're preparing for that future where graphene goes into a lot of sustainable applications and clean technology applications. So I'm really looking forward to that future where graphene is not only black, but it's also green. So I think, yeah, in terms of, I guess, advice to women or anybody else who's looking to get into advanced materials or nanotechnology, I think I would say if you're somebody who's curious and you want a fun career and you enjoy problem solving, then consider a career in science, consider a career in advanced materials. And I think, we've had the benefit of being at the frontier of working with graphene. It's every day is a learning experience. We don't have all the answers yet. So you come in every day, there's a new challenge. It never gets boring because nobody has all the answers. So you're constantly trying to solve problems. So I think if you're that curious person, you're confident, you're really looking to apply yourself, then I'm sure you'll succeed if you're that way inclined. It's not for everybody, but I think it's a fun career. I've enjoyed it so far, working with a really good team. So I think, yeah, I would recommend it for anybody who enjoys science and has the curiosity and drive to push forward.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us we're all part of this journey of a brand new industry. I mean, that's rare to actually be able to be at the forefront of something that didn't exist a decade ago. So Turid, I'll point to you for the next comments, if you don't mind sharing with us your perspectives.
Absolutely. I would second Angie with thermal management. I think that's a field we definitely need to look at. And I would also second Lynn for sustainability and also for the combination of properties. So everybody who's read papers or publications about graphene, they all start the same with the magic material, wonder material with amazing physical, thermal, electrical, everything properties. And I think the combination of those will play a big role because it is really a super material on all aspects. And on the question of a gender issue, ever since I very first started my studies in mechanical engineering, that was the last time when we have more than 15% women. After that, it never was an issue anymore. And I was not regarded as a woman doing mechanical engineering or something. I was a material scientist. And I think it's a great world to be, and it's a great, I work with great people, both in Cambridge and in Karlsruhe, and it's also the women here in this panel. I mean, that's the people we meet. And I think it's a pretty cool environment.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Tori. Thank you so much. And Haley, we'll conclude with your perspectives.
Yes, sorry about having to go off camera for a little bit. I was having a bit of connection issues, but back. And excited to kind of close out. So the future of graphene, I think, is endless. At Mito Materials, we're focused a lot on composite materials. Sustainability is a big thing for us. And I think that graphene has a major role to play in just the transition away from metal and into composites within several different industries that are such as transportation and aerospace. For women in industry, I think I'll take a different approach. As a woman in industry, you're a woman, right? But what I think is so impressive and important and what captivates me about being a woman in industry is that we are always breaking the glass ceiling. It's the diversity in thought that we bring to this industry, to material science, that allows a material like graphene to be commercialized this much quicker. It is one of the newest materials and has gone through expansive growth since 2004 when it was discovered, because I think women have been a really big part of its commercialization, because we continue to push boundaries and connect dots and do work in standardization and document everything. And I think as you look through history, women have been doing that on the sidelines throughout history, right? Like taking notes and making sure that things, and we never got the credit. I think in graphene, I think if you want to be a woman in this industry, you can make a real name for yourself. This material is going to change the world. It's multifunctional. It's, got all of these different unlocking properties, literally semi-magical in cases, right? You're learning something new every day. And so I have 2 female engineers on my team. I am not an engineer, actually, more business oriented, but I find it inspiring to watch them converse with the male colleagues and go to conferences and be immersed in the male world of industry and see us taking on and challenging ideas and breaking ceilings with new materials. And I think that's why you should join the graphene industry and jump into science.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate that. I want to give a heartfelt thanks to everyone on the panel for sharing your time. I know is really valuable. I hope this thought experiment and just having a conversation around it in this format worked for everybody. Just as an observation, and thank you for being part of the Graphene Council as well. I mean, we're trying to do our best for the industry, but we can't do it without the participation of industry. And I also feel there's this really sense of collaboration and mutual objectives that we have. It's not a cutthroat industry at this point. We're just trying to create our place in existing materials and build an industry from scratch. So we should congratulate ourselves on the progress that we're all making. On behalf of the Graphene Council, thank you all for participating. Sincerely wish everyone nothing but unbounded success. For everybody who listened and participated, I hope this was interesting to you and really should give you some tremendous insights into the potential of graphene as a material and as an industry. And so with that, we'll close today's webinar, and thank you again. Just really appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Be safe.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.